Joshua is my real son. Those words hit the middle of our living room with a heavy thud. Rain tapped against the Seattle windows, and only the hiss of the oxygen tube and the ticking clock filled the cold, quiet room. My older son Eric's face was flushed red with anger, while Joshua, my younger son, kept his head down, his pale hands trembling. I crumpled the copy of the will I was holding. I had endured. I had fallen apart, and then a deep, lonely emptiness washed over me. Only that day did I realize that the adopted child I had raised for 20 years was actually the proof of my husband's betrayal. Why such an ending landed in the middle of my old age, that story I will now tell you slowly. You're listening to Silver Story Tree, where the voices of life's late chapters gently bloom again. Subscribe, like, and turn on the bell to hear more heartfelt stories that grow with time. The sound of rain tapping against the windows was growing heavier. I pulled down the deli's shutter, thinking another long day had come to an end. Evenings in Lakewood town were always this quiet. But as I climbed the steps to our house, shouting from the living room stopped me in my tracks. The moment I opened the door, Eric's voice exploded. "Dad, have you lost your mind?" The sound of his fist hitting the table echoed with a thud. I stood there in the entryway, still wearing my jacket. Papers were scattered across the table. Hospital records, copies of a will, handwritten notes all mixed together. Eric's face was flushed red, and Joshua sat with his head down, unable to say a word. Tom leaned against the sofa, an oxygen tube in his nose, saying weakly, "Boys, let's not do this to your old man." There was no sense of responsibility in his voice. Eric grabbed the will and turned toward me. "Mom, look at this. Do you know what it says?" He waved the paper in the air. "To my biological son Joshua Collins, I leave all real estate properties." Biological son. The moment that word hit my ears, everything around me went silent. Biological? I looked at Joshua. He still couldn't lift his head. Eric turned to face his father. "He was your son even before the adoption, wasn't he? From the very beginning, right?" His voice trembled with anger and betrayal. My legs gave out and I leaned against the wall. Scenes from 20 years ago flashed through my mind. A small hospital parking lot on the outskirts of Seattle, a day when snow mixed with rain. A woman in a red coat holding a baby. Tom was silent for a long moment before speaking in a small voice. "Linda, Joshua is my blood." Those words froze the air in the living room completely. Joshua lifted his head. Tears pooled in his eyes. "Eric, I didn't know. I really didn't." His voice shook with desperation. Eric laughed bitterly. "So that's why you favored him your whole life. That's why I had to take out student loans for college, while you paid his medical bills right away." 20 years of hurt spilled out in his words. I gripped the edge of the table and asked, "Tom, who was that woman at the hospital? The one in the red coat who handed us the baby?" Tom didn't answer. Only the hissing sound of the oxygen machine filled the living room. Eric threw the stack of papers back on the table. "Mom, this wasn't an adoption. It was fraud. He lied to our entire family." Joshua said through tears, "Eric, I'm sorry. I really didn't know." But Eric turned and went into his room. The door slammed shut. Left in the living room were just me, Joshua, and Tom with his oxygen tube, eyes closed. My knees buckled and I sank into a chair. Outside, the rain continued to fall. The sound reminded me of that day 20 years ago. I covered my face with my hands and thought, I should have known something was wrong. Everything's been wrong since that day. The will lay on the table under the fluorescent light. I stared at the paper and whispered, "What am I supposed to do now?" I didn't sleep at all that night. Going back in time brings us to a winter 20 years ago. It was a day when snow mixed with rain fell in the parking lot of a community hospital on the outskirts of Seattle. Tom brought it up suddenly after dinner. "Linda, what if we had a second child?" I stopped washing the dishes. Tom had an unusually careful expression. But I knew. We'd been going through infertility treatments for 3 years. Hospital receipts were piled up in the drawer. The numbers on each billing statement grew larger. But the results were always the same. After giving birth to Eric, my body couldn't carry another child. Tom sat on the living room sofa and said, "A coworker's sister is having trouble raising a baby alone. What if we considered adoption?" I hesitated. "Adoption?" Tom nodded. It's a newborn, not even 3 months old yet. If we raise him, he could grow up just like our own." Something in my heart stirred. Eric was already 22 and living in a college dorm. And I felt lonely in the empty house. The memory of the baby I'd miscarried after having Eric came back to me. A few days later, Tom handed me a slip of paper with a hospital address. "Let's go there tomorrow. The baby's mother wants to meet us." The next morning, I got in the car nervously. After driving about 40 minutes toward the Seattle outskirts, a small community hospital appeared. There were only a few cars in the parking lot and the air hung cold and still. Tom got out of the car first and looked around. A moment later, a woman came out through the hospital door. She wore a red coat. In her arms was a baby wrapped in a white blanket. I watched from inside the car. The woman looked to be in her late 30s. Her face was pale and her eyes were red and swollen. Tom walked up to her and said something. The woman nodded and held up the baby. That's when I got out of the car. My heart beat fast as I approached. The woman said, "Please let this child grow up only in a warm home." Her voice trembled but was firm. "Please." I took the baby in my arms. I could feel small, warm breaths. The baby was sleeping and had a tiny milk stain at the corner of his mouth. My chest grew warm, but in that moment, I felt something strange. The woman's gaze lingered longer on Tom than on me. She looked at Tom and said, "Tom, please." I looked up at those words. She's calling him by his first name? Tom avoided my gaze and said, "She's a coworker's sister, like I said." The woman turned and went back inside the hospital. Her red coat fluttered in the wind, and the door closed with a quiet sound. On the way back to the car, I asked Tom, "Is she really a coworker's sister?" Tom nodded while gripping the steering wheel. "Yeah, I've met her a few times." But there was no conviction in Tom's voice. I looked down at the baby in my arms and thought, something's off. But I pushed the thought away. This baby is our son now. We came home and I laid the baby in the bed. Eric called from his dorm. "Mom, I have a little brother?" I smiled and answered, "Yes, we named him Joshua." But every night I thought about that woman in the red coat. The way she called Tom's name, something in that look made me uncomfortable. Tom was especially devoted to Joshua. Even when the baby cried in the middle of the night, Tom got up first to make formula, and every weekend he pushed the stroller to the park. He never did that much with Eric. I sometimes asked, why only Joshua? Tom smiled and answered, "He's our late baby. So he's extra special." But that wasn't the real reason. Looking back now, Tom was treating the child out of guilt. I still remember that parking lot scene today. The snow mixing with rain, and the way that woman in the red coat looked at Tom for the last time. A question remained in one corner of my heart from that day on. The 5 alarm went off. I went down to the deli kitchen and pulled out a knife. As I was cutting sandwich ingredients, I stopped. I can't pretend anymore. What happened in the living room the night before kept circling in my mind. Eric's anger, Joshua's tears, Tom's silence. And that word written in the will. Biological. I took off my apron and walked toward the garage. There was a small safe Tom had installed a few years ago for emergency money. I grabbed the key and went out. When I opened the garage door, the smell of old paper mixed with oil. I could see the rusty safe in the corner. I knelt down and turned the key. With a click, the safe door opened. Inside were a few bills along with an old document envelope. On the outside of the envelope was a handwritten name. Rachel Green. My hand trembled. I slowly opened the envelope. 2 things came out. One was a paternity acknowledgement form on hospital letterhead. And the other was a letter written in shaky handwriting. When I unfolded the letter, I could see where the ink had run. The writing was by hand and emotion filled every sentence. "Tom, please protect this child. Do what I couldn't do. Let him grow up in a warm home. Please." The last line made my heart stop. "Tom, please keep our baby alive. For me, our baby." Those words echoed in my head. She wrote, "Our baby." I read the letter again. 3 times, 4 times, over and over. I unfolded the paternity acknowledgement form. It had Tom's signature along with the name Rachel Green. At the bottom of the document was a hospital stamp. I slumped down on the floor of the safe. My back touched the cold wall and I couldn't breathe. That day from 20 years ago came back to me. The woman in the red coat. The voice with which she called Tom's name, the desperation in her eyes. Then my cell phone rang. The caller ID showed Maria Spencer, attorney. I answered with shaking hands. Mrs. Collins, there are important changes to the will. Maria's voice was calm but firm. Can you come to my office this afternoon? I answered, all right. I'll be there. After hanging up, I put the letter back in the envelope. Walking from the garage back to the house. The dawn air brushed cold against my face. I looked up at the sky. A few stars remained. I came into the kitchen and made coffee. Steam rose and I wrapped both hands around the cup. What do I do now? Light leaked through the gap under Eric's door. He must not have slept all night. Joshua was asleep on the living room sofa under a blanket. I stood by the living room window and looked out at the dawn streets of Lakewood Town. The streetlights were going out one by one. With the letter in my pocket, I muttered, Rachel, who were you? What were you to Tom? But no answer came. I opened the deli door and went back down to the kitchen. I picked up the knife and cut onions. Tears came, but I couldn't tell if it was from the onions or from sadness. At 2 in the afternoon, I headed for Tacoma. Maria's law office was in the city center. I parked the car and took a deep breath. It was time to face the truth. The Tacoma law office was a 3-story building. I climbed the stairs, gripping the envelope in my hand. A small nameplate was attached to Maria's office door. When I knocked, a voice from inside said, "Come in." Maria sat at her desk. She looked to be in her mid-50s, and looked at me through her glasses, gesturing to a chair. "Have a seat, Mrs. Collins." I sat down in the chair. Maria placed a stack of documents on the desk. "Your husband recently revised his will. About a month ago." I looked up. "Revised?" Maria nodded and opened the new will. It was written even more clearly there. "To my biological son Joshua Collins. I leave all real estate properties including the Lakewood House and Collins Deli building." I read the sentence slowly. "To my biological son Joshua Collins. Not an adopted child, but a biological son." Maria said, "This will is legally valid. But you have the right to contest it." I took the envelope out of my bag. "Please look at this too." Maria took the envelope and opened it. As she read the letter and paternity acknowledgement form, her face hardened. "This could be evidence," Maria said quietly. "Your husband could be seen as having committed fraud. During the adoption process." I looked out the window. People were walking along the Tacoma city streets. I asked, "What happens now?" Maria organized the papers and said, "It could go to court. Or it could be resolved through family agreement. The choice is yours." Just then my cell phone rang. It was Joshua. I answered. "Mom, the hospital called. Dad's test results are in." I looked at Maria and said, "I need to go to the hospital." Maria nodded. "I'll keep the documents. Take your time thinking about it." Seattle Medical Center was 40 minutes away by car. I drove hurriedly. When I arrived at the hospital parking lot, Joshua was waiting at the entrance. "Mom, this way." Joshua led me to the nephrology office. The doctor had X-ray images up on the monitor. "Mr. Collins, your husband's kidney function has weakened considerably." The doctor explained calmly. "We need to start dialysis. But if we're considering a transplant, we need to find a suitable donor among family members." I asked, "How do we test for that?" The doctor answered, "We do blood type and tissue compatibility testing. Among the family, only Joshua is a match." Joshua froze. "Only me?" The doctor nodded. "Yes, your blood type and tissue type are closest to your father's." Joshua went out into the hallway and leaned against the wall. So he really was my biological father. His voice trembled. I put my hand on his shoulder. "Joshua," but I couldn't continue. I didn't know what to say. Eric appeared from the end of the hallway. He looked at us and approached. "You heard the results? Only Joshua's a match?" Joshua lowered his head. Eric said with a bitter laugh, "So that's why he favored you your whole life." "Same blood." I called out, "Eric, stop it." But Eric turned and headed for the elevator. On the way down to the hospital lobby, I asked Joshua, "What are you going to do?" Joshua looked out the window and answered, "I don't know, Mom. I'm just confused." In the car on the way home, I thought about Maria's words. "The choice is yours." When I parked in front of the Lakewood house, I made a decision. I won't leave it like this. I'll sort it out myself. I went into the living room and Tom was sitting on the sofa. I stood in front of him. Tom, it can't be your way anymore. I'm going to rebuild this house. Tom looked up. Fear flashed in his eyes. I took the letter out of my pocket and placed it on the table. 3 days later, Tom was discharged. The front door creaked open. Joshua pushed the wheelchair and brought Tom into the living room. I was in the kitchen making warm soup. As soon as Tom sat on the sofa, he smiled and said, "All right. Let's talk about inheritance properly." As if nothing had happened, Eric came out of his room. He stood in the middle of the living room with his arms crossed. "Inheritance? It's already decided. You're giving everything to Joshua." Joshua shook his head. "Eric, I really don't want it." Eric laughed bitterly. "Want it or not, it's already in the will." Tom coughed and said, "Boys, listen to your dad. Joshua's the late baby, so I need to take care of him more." There was still no sense of responsibility in his voice. Eric pounded the table with his fist. "He's not a late baby, he's your son from an affair." The air in the living room froze instantly. Joshua covered his face with his hands. "Eric, stop. Please." His voice trembled. I put down the soup ladle in the kitchen. My arms shook, but I held it in. The sound of my footsteps on the floor echoed as I walked into the living room. Tom fiddled with his oxygen tube and said, "Linda, it's all a misunderstanding. If I explain." But I cut him off and stood in front of the table. Eric unfolded the will copy again. "Look, Mom. To my biological son Joshua Collins, I leave all real estate properties. Proof he's not adopted but a biological son." I took a deep breath. Then I brought my palm down hard on the table. The sound echoed through the entire living room. "I'm talking today." My voice was low but firm. All 3 men looked at me. I took the red envelope out of my bag. The letter and paternity acknowledgement form I'd gotten from the safe. I spread them out on the table. Eric picked up the letter. He started reading slowly. "Tom, please keep our baby alive for me." His hand trembled. Joshua asked, "What is this, Mom?" I answered, "A letter from your birth mother. A woman named Rachel Green." The living room went quiet. Only the ticking of the clock could be heard. Tom started to speak. "Linda, that's..." But I raised my hand to stop him. "It's not your turn to talk." I handed Eric the paternity acknowledgement form. "Look at this too. It's a hospital document. Signed 20 years ago." Eric read the document. Tom's name and Rachel Green's name were side by side. He looked up at Tom. "So you knew from the beginning and lied about it being an adoption?" Tom didn't answer. Only the hissing of the oxygen machine filled the living room. Joshua asked in a trembling voice, "Then who am I? Am I adopted or a biological son?" I put my hand on his shoulder. "You're my son, Joshua. That hasn't changed." Eric pushed his chair back and stood up. "This is ridiculous. You lied to our entire family for 20 years. His voice was full of anger. I gripped the edge of the table and said, "That's why I'm going to fix it. The will isn't going your way anymore, Tom. I'm going to rebuild this house my way." Tom looked at me with surprised eyes. "Linda, what do you mean?" I cut him off. "I already talked to the lawyer. I'm going to balance things with my assets." Eric asked, "Your assets?" I nodded. "The deli building is in my name. Half the house is mine too. The savings account is joint." Joshua said, "Mom, I don't need anything. Give it all to Eric." I shook my head. "No, you're both my sons. I'm dividing it fairly." Eric looked out the window. His eyes were red. "Mom, but I waited for his words. I'm not angry at Joshua. I was just angry at Dad." Joshua looked up. Eric turned around. "You didn't do anything wrong, Joshua. I'm sorry." For the first time, the 2 brothers looked at each other. I watched the scene and held back tears. Tom said in a small voice, "Linda, I turned my head toward him. "I don't want to hear from you anymore. Rest in the hospital room. We're done talking here." Joshua pushed the wheelchair and took Tom to his room. The door closed quietly. Only Eric and I remained in the living room. Eric asked, "Mom, are you really okay?" I smiled. "I'm okay. This is just the beginning." Through the window, I could see the evening sky over Lakewood Town. Sunset was spreading between the clouds. That night, I raised my voice for the first time. It was past 11 at night. Only Joshua and I remained in the deli kitchen. Under the fluorescent light, Joshua was wiping the table. The sound of the cloth wiping quietly echoed. I poured 2 cups of coffee. I placed one in front of Joshua. Sit down. Joshua pulled out a chair and sat. He wrapped both hands around the cup but didn't take a sip. Mom, can I ask you something? Joshua's voice was small. I nodded. Ask. Joshua hesitated for a long time before opening his mouth. Do I belong here? His eyes reddened. My chest tightened. Joshua, what are you talking about? Joshua shook his head. I came into this house through a lie. Not even an adoption but a child born from an affair. I took his hand. You've always been my son. It doesn't matter how you were born. But Joshua wiped his tears and said, then why was Dad only good to me? I thought about the letter. The last sentence Rachel Green left. Tom treated Joshua out of guilt. It wasn't love, it was compensatory psychology. I said slowly, that's not your fault. The sin belongs to the adults. What Dad did and what I ignored. Joshua asked, when did you start feeling something was wrong? I looked out the window. From the beginning. From that hospital parking lot 20 years ago. Remember the woman in the red coat? I looked at Joshua and said, when she called Dad's name, her voice was different. They weren't just acquaintances. Joshua lowered his head. So you knew alone for 20 years? I shook my head. I wasn't certain. I just had a feeling something was off. Joshua picked up the cloth again and wiped the table. His hand shook. Mom, I don't want to lose Eric too. Hearing those words, I made up my mind. That's why I'm stepping up. Inheritance, assets, the house, I'm reorganizing everything. Joshua looked up. How? I answered, fairly to both Eric and Joshua. So you don't hate each other? Joshua asked, what about Dad? I looked toward the kitchen sink. Dad's share stays as he decided. But my share is mine to decide. Through the window, I could see the night streets of Lakewood Town. The streetlights shone quietly. I took out my phone and sent Maria a text. I'll come to the office tomorrow. I want to write a new will. Joshua said, Mom, I really don't want anything. I patted his shoulder. I know, but this isn't about what you want or don't want. It's proof you're part of this family. Joshua wiped his tears. I took a sip of coffee. It was cold but I could feel it going down my throat. The deli kitchen clock pointed to midnight. The second hand ticked away. I said to Joshua, go upstairs and sleep now. We'll be busy starting tomorrow. Joshua nodded and stood up. Watching Joshua's back as he climbed the stairs. I thought, this child is innocent. So was that newborn wrapped in a blanket in the hospital. Parking lot 20 years ago. I turned off the light and left the kitchen. Walking down the hallway, light leaked from Tom's room. But I didn't knock on that door. Now was the time for rebuilding, not revenge. The next morning I headed for Tacoma. The Pierce County Courthouse was in the city center. I parked the car and gathered my bag. Inside were the documents I'd taken from the safe. I pulled a number at the courthouse lobby. The paper came out with a beep. My waiting number was 17. I sat in a plastic chair and waited my turn. Maria came into the lobby. She was carrying a document bag. Mrs. Collins, are you ready? I nodded. Maria explained, we'll keep your husband's will as is. But balance it with your assets. Redistribute the deli building, savings account, and part of the house share. I asked, can we make sure the two sons don't fight? Maria smiled. That's why we'll put in a joint ownership clause. They can only sell if they both agree. The clerk called my number. I went forward with Maria. I submitted documents and showed my ID. The clerk reviewed the documents. Will revision. You need 2 witnesses. Maria answered, we prepared them at the office. We went up to the notary room on the courthouse's 2nd floor. In the small room were 1 desk and 3 chairs. 2 witnesses were already there. I read the new will. The document Maria drafted stated clearly. The deli building goes 50% each to Eric and Joshua. The Lakewood house gives Joshua residence rights but ownership is joint. The savings account is split in half. The last clause was important. The 2 sons cannot sell real estate without mutual agreement. And Joshua's residence rights are permanently guaranteed. I picked up the pen and signed. My hand trembled but I wrote my name clearly. Linda Collins. The 2 witnesses also signed in turn. The notary stamped the document. With a thud, the document became official. Leaving the courthouse, I headed to the registry office. The King County Registry Office was 2 blocks from the courthouse. Afternoon sunlight sparkled on the building's glass windows. The registry office waiting room was crowded with people. I pulled another number and waited. Maria sat next to me organizing documents. Mrs. Collins, what will you do with this letter? Maria pointed to Rachel's letter from the safe. I thought for a moment. I'll keep it, I said quietly, but I won't use it as court evidence. Maria asked, you won't sue your husband? I nodded. I don't want to show the children their father becoming a criminal. Maria nodded. A wise choice. My number was called. I went to the counter and submitted the asset division documents. The sound of the clerk typing information into the computer clicked away. Registration will take 2 weeks. The clerk said. Keep the receipt safe. Walking out of the registry office, I looked up at the sky. Clouds drifted slowly by. Maria said, Mrs. Collins, you did wonderfully. You made sure the 2 sons won't hate each other. I smiled. It's not over yet. This is just the beginning. In the car on the way home, I turned on the radio. Quiet jazz music flowed out. When I arrived in front of the Lakewood house, Eric and Joshua were sitting on the front steps. I got out of the car and walked toward them. Mom, what happened? Eric asked. I took out the document envelope. I sorted everything out. Fair for both of you. Joshua said, Mom, I stopped his words. I know, but this is your right. And it's also the brothers' duty to protect each other. Eric lowered his head. Mom, I was actually sorry to Joshua. Joshua looked at him. You too? For the first time, the 2 brothers held hands. I watched the scene and held back tears. I opened the front door and went inside the house. Tom was sitting on the living room sofa. I passed him and went to the kitchen. The letter was still in my bag. Rachel Green's last request. I took out the letter and read it one more time. Now this letter had become a starting point for reconciliation, not a tool for revenge. 3 months passed. On a rainy spring afternoon, I stood with Eric and Joshua at Seattle Memorial Park Cemetery. Tom had passed away a month ago. His kidney function never recovered. The headstone was simple. Tom Collins, a father who protected his home. Those words were engraved on it. Eric placed flowers in front of the headstone and said, Dad, you protected the house. But you broke a lot of hearts. His voice was calm but tinged with sadness. Joshua knelt and brushed the grass with his hand. Still, thank you for keeping me alive. I'll live well. He wiped his tears. I looked at the headstone and thought about the woman in the red coat from 20 years ago. Rachel Green. Her last request came to mind. Rachel, I kept your request. I said in my heart. Joshua grew up in a warm home. Now he'll live protecting each other with his brother. Raindrops fell on the headstone. The patter sounded quietly. Eric put his hand on my shoulder. Mom, let's go now. Before it rains harder. I nodded, walking from the cemetery to the parking lot. Joshua said, Mom, I have a promotion interview for hospital administration next week. I smiled. You'll do great. Eric added, I got offered a logistics center manager position too. I'll help with the deli every weekend. Getting in the car, I started the engine. The sound of rain tapped the windows. Wipers moved left and right, clearing away the raindrops. On the way back to downtown Seattle, I looked out the window. The Space Needle stood in the rain. The city lights began to turn on one by one. I muttered, my husband's betrayal was his to own. But raising him was mine. Now it's time to care for myself too. When we arrived in front of the Lakewood house, the rain had stopped. The 2 sons climbed the front steps first. Eric turned and said, Mom, let's have dinner together tonight, all 4 of us. Joshua added, I'll make pasta. I smiled and answered, sounds good. I'll make the salad today. I opened the front door and went inside. The sofa where Tom used to sit was still in the living room. But now that spot was empty. Going into the kitchen, I put on an apron and opened the refrigerator. I took out lettuce and tomatoes and began washing them. The sound of running water echoed in the sink. Joshua came into the kitchen and took out pasta. Mom, boil water. I put the pot on and turned on the gas range. Blue flames blazed up. Eric wiped the living room table and set out plates. The sound of 3 people moving around doing their tasks filled the house. As I cut lettuce, I thought, that baby I held in the hospital parking lot 20 years ago is now an adult making pasta. Time has passed so quickly. I couldn't forgive Tom's betrayal. But I didn't want to live trapped in hatred. I didn't want to pass hatred down to my children either. Rachel Green's letter is still kept in my drawer. Sometimes I take it out and read it. Those sentences now come to me as understanding, not resentment. She must have had no choice. She must have been in a situation where she couldn't raise the child alone. That heart that had to make one last request to Tom. The sound of water boiling could be heard. Bubbles rose inside the pot. Joshua put in the pasta. Eric called from the living room. Mom, the table's all set. I picked up the salad bowl and went to the living room. 4 plates were on the table. Tom's place was still there, but we left that spot empty now. Joshua brought the pasta. Steam rose and the scent of tomato sauce spread. Before picking up my fork, I looked at my 2 sons for a moment. Eric was about to get promoted at the logistics center, and Joshua was building his career in hospital administration. The 2 brothers had learned how to protect each other. They decided to run the deli together and manage the house jointly. The moment I put the fork in my mouth, I felt it. This is a new beginning. While washing dishes after the meal, Joshua asked, Mom, do you still have the letter? The one Rachel wrote? I nodded. I'm keeping it. Joshua said, can I read it someday? I looked at him and answered, I'll show you when you're ready. No need to rush. Joshua smiled. Thank you, Mom. That night I lay in bed and looked out the window. Stars were shining in the night sky over Lakewood town. In my heart, I muttered, I never knew that one sentence. Left by the woman in the red coat that day would become a lesson for my life. The betrayal belonged to my husband, but raising him was mine. And now it's time to care for myself. When I closed my eyes, that day from 20 years ago came to mind. The hospital parking lot where snow mixed with rain. The woman in the red coat, and the small baby wrapped in a blanket. All those moments brought me here. I fell asleep peacefully. Dear friends, if any of you have gone through betrayal and hurt within your own family, like I have, I'd like to share a bit of my heart with you. Today, I learned that what we must protect first is not blood, but the heart of an innocent child and my own dignity. I realized it late, but it is not too late. And we still have the courage and hope to reset our relationships and rebuild our lives. If you have had similar experiences or stories buried in your heart, please feel free to share them quietly in the comments, so we can be a comfort to one another. If my story stayed with you today, I would be truly grateful if you could support me with a subscribe and a like. And if someone you know comes to mind, please gently share this video so a small bit of comfort can reach their heart as well. Thank you sincerely for staying with me until the end, and I wish health and peace for you and your family for a long, long time.